Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. So this is Basavaraj. So we'll be continuing the disaster management where we have stopped on Friday. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Right. Good evening to all and welcome. Good evening. Good evening. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Good evening, Manju. Good evening. Yes. Okay. So we were discussing about landslides. In the landslides, it is a part of mass wasting, right? So you should know some rough idea about geographical terminologies. Not exactly the complete definition, but something which is near to that, right? So mass wasting, when huge amount of debris, rocks, when they fall down the slopes under the influence of gravity, we refer that as mass wasting, right? And this landslide is a part or a type of mass wasting, right? Now the problem associated with this mass wasting is whenever the mass wasting happens, it affects the rescue and relief operations. It affects the rescue and relief operations. The reason being, when the debris fall, when the rocks fall, so they obstruct the other infrastructures, so they block the roadways. Sometimes they will block the railways. So because of these, the relief measures, that is after the disaster or during the disaster, when the rescue and relief measures are delayed, so that will lead to large amount of casualties. So this will lead to more injuries or more losses. So always remember certain types of hazards like landslides, sometimes floods, they respect or we say they disrupt the transportation, they disrupt the other infrastructures. So here the term is disruption, disruption of vital infrastructure, right? And hence they lead to large amount of the deaths. See, when you talk about Hind Kush Himalayan changes, Nutan, this is somewhat which is referred as the geographical, or we say that something which is referred with ecology and environment. But yet you have asked, I'll explain that. So Hind Kush Himalayan region. So this is referred as the third pole of the earth, or it is referred as water tower of Asia, right? So it is referred as third pole of an earth because here we find the third largest ice deposit is there, apart from North Pole and South Pole. So we find the North Pole and South Poles are the two poles, first pole, second pole, and this is the third pole or water tower of Asia. Now, this Hindu Kush Himalayan region is spread in 8 countries, including India, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, right, Bangladesh, Myanmar. So 8 countries it is spread. It is spread in 8 countries, right? And it is a source of 10 major rivers. It is a source of 10 major rivers. 10 major rivers originate from that area, right? And as it is having a thick ice deposits, it is also referred as an important part of the Earth's fifth sphere. Earth's fifth sphere. Now, in geography, you have studied that lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere. The three spheres are there. Now, three spheres where they meet, a possibility of life is there. We refer that as biosphere. Apart from that, the regions on the earth where the ice deposits are there, which is permafrost, permanently frozen areas. Such areas we refer them as cryosphere. Cryosphere. So hence Arctic is a part of cryosphere. Antarctic is a part of cryosphere. Himalayan glaciers is part of cryosphere. The Hindu Kush Himalayan glacier is part of cryosphere. So hence it is an important part of the cryosphere where we find thick ice deposits are there. Now this cryosphere is very sensitive to global warming and climate change. It is very sensitive to global warming and climate change. And the direct impact of global warming and climate change is seen in the context of melting of the ice or glacier in the Himalayan region. Melting of ice or glacier in the Himalayan region. Now, what are the reason for melting of the glacier? Now, here the reason for them is global warming and climate change. And the dominant factor is man-made part. Man-made fact. Now, what is the man-made reason for increasing of the temperature in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region? The first part is the greenhouse gas which have been emitted. Now, this greenhouse gas which have been emitted is mainly by using the fossil fuels. Apart from that, burning of biomass. I'm using the term burning of biomass. Right. So fossil fuels like petrol, diesel, coal, when they burn, then they release a large amount of carbon dioxide. We refer them as greenhouse gases. Apart from these, apart from the fossil fuels, we also find certain carbons are released. We refer that as biomass burning. That is referred as brown carbon or dark carbon. So remember, the carbon which is released by burning of fossil fuels, we refer that as black carbon. This is black carbon. And the carbon which is released by the burning of biomass, that is forest fires, crop residues, or any waste which is released, we refer that as brown carbon. And in the Punjab and Haryana, we find large amount of stubble burning is there. And large areas of the forest like Uttarakhand, we find forest fires are predominantly increasing. So this biomass burning from the stubbles of Punjab and Haryana or from the forest fires of Uttarakhand, etc., which is adding large amount of brown carbon. Now this brown carbon and black carbon, it deposit on the surface of the glaciers. So this carbon will deposit on the surface of a glacier, that is on the third pole of the earth, the Hindu Kush Himalayas. Now, as these black carbon and brown carbon deposit on the surface of the ice, now what will happen to the albedo of the ice? Will it remain same, decrease, or increase? Please answer this. Nutan, what happens when these black carbon and brown carbon deposit on that? So the moment when they deposit, the albedo decreases. It means the reflectivity decreases and the absorption of the heat increases in the ice. And the moment when they absorb, the temperature increases, and that is where the Hindu Kush Himalayan regions are melting faster than what they have thought. In the Kush Himalayan region, glaciers are melting faster than what we have thought. And also the report which is given by Hindu Kush Himalayan region some 3 years back, which is the first ever Hindu Kush Himalayan assessment report. The first ever Hindu Kush Himalayan region assessment report, some 3-4 years back. First ever assessment, where it has said that even if we keep the 1.5 degrees centigrade, the average temperature which is increasing, so we will lose more amount of glaciers, or almost all 60 to 70% of the glaciers will melt by end of this century. And already we have lost 30% of the glaciers there because of the man-made global warming. We refer them as the black carbon and brown carbon, which is there. And it is one of the reason for accelerating of the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayan region. And these glaciers which are melting are nothing but creating the glacial lakes. That is where we will be discussing that as the next disaster. I hope it is clear. Hindu Kush, Himalaya. Right. So this is some rough idea which you have to be keeping in the mind when we talk about Hindu Kush Himalayan region. There is a possibility of asking question on this because of large amount of anthropogenic factors, that is the black carbon, brown carbon, all which have been accumulated on the surface of the Himalayan region. Is that clear now? Perfect. So this is something about Hindu Kush Himalayan region. We will take that when I discuss the GLOF. Now stick to landslides. Right. Now landslide is a type of mass movement. Mass movement. Right. Now what are the reasons for landslides? Now the reason for landslides are different, but for Himalayas we come across certain specific region. Right. Now for Himalayas, certain specific regions are there. Geology of area. And this is associated only with Himalayan parts. See, landslides we find in Western Ghats, landslides we find in Eastern Ghats, but in the Himalayas, apart from common features, there is some other factors also. And the other factors are geology of Himalayas. Now, under the geology of Himalayas, the first region is, as it is a region where the two plates are meeting, that is Indian plate and Eurasian plate. So it is margins of the plates, margins of the plates, Indian plate and Eurasian plate. And hence, the boundaries of the plates are always associated with earthquake. Margin means the boundaries. Boundaries of the plates are always associated with earthquake. Right. And hence, because of this region, the earthquake triggers the landslides in the Himalayas. That is one, margins or the boundaries. Second geological aspect is, we know that Indian plate after meeting, it has subducted. So we know the Indian plate has subducted beneath the Eurasian plate. So this is Indian plate and this is Eurasian plate. And this Indian plate is still grinding. It is still moving beneath the Eurasian plate. So we say Indian plate which has subducted beneath the Eurasian plate. And not only it is subducted, it is still grinding. Grinding means moving, and grinding means moving at the rate of 5 centimeters per year, at the rate of 5 centimeters per year. And this is as per the National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA. Now this grinding is creating a friction. This grinding is creating a friction. And this friction is responsible for landslides in the Himalayan region. This friction is responsible for the landslides. And this type of frictions are not seen in the Western Ghats nor in the Eastern Ghats. So this is where the Himalayas are vulnerable due to friction and due to the meeting of the plates. Right. Then steep slopes. So if any mountains are having steep slopes, then it is always naturally the landslides are dominant. So steep slopes means naturally landslides are dominant here. And if you see the nature of Himalayas, Himalayan slopes are steeper towards India. So Himalayan slopes are steeper towards India. Towards India. And hence, naturally we find the landslides are there. Then after that, all other regions are common. If you take Western Ghats, Eastern Ghats, all other are common. Shifting cultivation, faulty agricultural practices, deforestation. Then construction and mining activities. So all these activities are responsible for one activity, which is called as removal of vegetation. So this is responsible for removal of vegetation. Vegetation means the grasses, the trees, etc. So vegetation always have a very good impact on the slopes. So this vegetation holds the soil. It holds the soil, the roots and its stems. The roots and the stem support. So they act as a rigid part which holds the topsoil, which prevents the soil erosion, which prevents the landslides. So any area wherever vegetation has been removed, so that areas are always high vulnerable in the context of landslide. So please remember this. So vegetation plays an important role in landslide management, right? So these practices, shifting cultivation or slash and burning, wrong agricultural practices where the topsoil is removed or where the vegetation is removed, maybe when they do the activities like growing the crops against the slopes, or sometimes in the Western Ghats, in the Himalayas, we find that instead of growing multi-cropping, they are focusing on monocropping. Monocropping means growing only one type. Monocropping. So monocropping in the mountain is referred as something which destroys the stability. So monocropping in the mountain where only one type of crop is grown is referred as faulty agricultural practices, because monocropping is a condition where more areas are left bare, and that bare area is always vulnerable for soil erosion or landslides. So we refer that as faulty practices. Then overloading of that area. Sometimes if we are increasing the burden on that, then its carrying capacity decreases. If we increase the burden, or when we do over exploitation of that area, over exploitation, so because of these we find that it loses its carrying capacity. The area loses its carrying capacity, and that can lead to land subsidence and in turn landslides. So this can lead to land subsidence, and which in turn can lead to landslide. And this we have seen in the context of Joshimath. Example, Joshimath, where due to large amount of the construction work or the pilgrimage activities, or what we say unorganized tourism activities, unsustainable tourism activities, which destroyed the carrying capacity of Joshimath, which is responsible for land subsistence in that area. And this land subsistence is responsible for something called as the landslides there. Yes, tea plantation are also considered as faulty. They are considered as faulty when it is not done in the organized way. They are also referred as one, because during that also we find certain areas are disturbed, right? Then overgrazing. So overgrazing will also is having the same impact where it will remove the vegetation. Then heavy rainfall. Any region where we find heavy rainfalls are there, any region where heavy rainfalls are there, so this accelerate the landslides, accelerates landslides. That's the reason why whenever southwest monsoons are there, so during the southwest monsoons, the debris fall downward, the highways are blocked. During the southwest monsoons, we find the debris fall and the highways are blocked. Highways or railways are blocked. And that we have already seen if you take the highways in Kerala, Maharashtra. So we find that highways which connects there is stopped or it is blocked. Or sometimes an important highways in Assam, important highways in Uttarakhand, they all are stopped because of the disruption which has been caused by the debris which fall on the road areas. Then undercutting of the rivers in the Himalayas. Now what is undercutting of the rivers? Understand this. This is Himalayan region, and in the Himalayas, if this is a river which is flowing in this direction, a river which is flowing in this direction. Thus, this river will always have a capacity of erosion. The edges of the rivers will always make strong erosion, and this erosion is something which we refer them as cutting the edges of the mountain. So here we find the river starts cutting. This is called as erosion of a river, and this erosion itself is referred as the undercutting. The downward region of the mountain is cut. We refer that as undercutting. Undercutting. So up to this area, the erosion takes place. Now, when the erosion takes place, the sideward of the surface of the river, the upper portion of mountain will lose stability. So these areas will not have stability, they fall down. So this portion lose stability, and suddenly it falls down, and we refer that as the undercutting of the rivers in the Himalayas, which is responsible for landslides. Is that clear? So please remember the reasons for the landslides in the Himalayan region, more specifically earthquake, friction, and all other factors you can add. But when you're writing the landslides in the Western Ghats, Eastern Ghats, never mention about the friction, never mention about the earthquake, because they are comparatively stable than that of the Himalayas. In the Western Ghats, Eastern Ghats, we talk about deforestation, mining activities, construction activities which are responsible. Mining, construction, etc. are responsible in all other mountains, right? But in Himalayas, we talk about geology, which is dominant. Apart from that, undercutting of the rivers. Is that clear? So these are the reasons for landslides in the Himalayas. Reason for landslides in the Himalayan regions. Now, next is, if you see the datas, so in the context of datas, so this entire region is vulnerable for landslides. This is eastern part of India, Himalayas eastern part. Now, if you take the eastern part, that is Sikkim and northeastern part, 0.18 million hectares, 0.18 million hectares, which falls on the eastern sector of Himalayas, and then 0.14 million hectares, which falls in the western sector, 0.14 million hectares, which falls on the western side. Eastern Himalayas, Western Himalayas. Then next is something which is called as Western Ghats. So 0.09 million hectares in the Western Ghats. 0.09 million hectares, which is vulnerable in the Western Ghats. Western Ghats. And remaining we find in the eastern regions. In the eastern regions, that is Eastern Ghats near the Araku Valley. Araku Valley. 0.01 million hectares. So this is vulnerability profile of India. So this is called as vulnerability of landslide in India, right? So please remember this data. And apart from that, this Himalayan region, this entire Himalayan region falls under the zone 5. It falls under the zone 5 and zone 4. Zone 5 and zone 4. And this zone 5 and zone 4 is responsible for earthquake, and that earthquake triggers the landslides. Is that clear? So is there any connection that yes, they can be reason for the floods? Not all, few can be reason for the floods. So here we will find many reasons are there, which are almost all common for natural disasters. So floods can also be referred as the same. A part of that, many will be overlapping. Many will be overlapping. So this is vulnerability profile of India with reference to landslide. So if possible, remember this data. Draw this map and remember this data, which is very important if you are writing any answer in your mains with reference to landslides in India. Is that clear? 0.18 million hectares, 0.14 million hectares, then 0.09 million hectares of Western Ghats and 0.01 million hectares in the Eastern Ghats, vulnerable for landslide. Very simple to remember. Practice this one time, two time, and it becomes perfect in the context of your mains answer writing perspectives. See, 0.01 million hectares is a part of this Araku Valley, Araku region here. Now, this Araku Valley is very important. Araku Valley is very important for one type of coffee, which is also having a geographical indication, GI tag. We refer that as Araku coffee. Araku Valley is very famous for Araku coffee. And second one is this Araku Valley is also very close to what we refer them as the Seshachalam forest, where we find red sanders, Pushpa movie, red sanders. So here also we find Araku Valley, Seshachalam, Tirupati. All these are important places which are surrounding this region. Is it clear? So you have to be knowing these areas in your geography part. Araku Valley, red sanders, Seshachalam mountains, Eastern Ghats, near Tirupati. Okay. Now, next, we move on to a factual data. The Geological Survey of India is a nodal agency. Nodal agency means highest agency with reference to landslide management in India. And it is responsible for coordinating and undertaking geological studies. So these geological studies are in the areas where the landslides have taken, where the landslides have occurred. Right. So many areas where landslides are occurred. Now, when we study these landslides, they will make an assessment of that. And these assessments plays an important role in preparing strategy. Assessment plays an important role in preparing strategy or specific action for next landslides, for future landslides. Why? Because if you take all the landslides are not common. Every landslide has their own history. Every landslide will have their own geological history, right? Or every landfall will have their own causes. Some causes may be overlapping, but it is not that same single cause can be seen in all. So we find overlapping are there. So hence every landslide may be different. For example, in the Western Ghats, maybe due to heavy rainfall. In the Himalayas, maybe due to large amount of destruction activities. If we take the Uttarakhand region, more specifically, we refer that as Kumaon Gadwal region. Kumaon Gadwal region. Right. So in the Kumaon Gadwal region, more amount of construction activities are responsible for landslides in the Uttarakhand. So every landslide will have their own history. They will have their own reason for them. So hence, when we study many, then we will have some rough idea by which we can make a strategy or we can make future action, which is referred as risk management, which plays an important role in risk management. In the beginning and also after the event, how to make rescue and reliefs. Then to carry landslide zonation. So this is where we create a maps, and these maps play a very important role. And these maps are created based on the degrees of landslides, that is vulnerability of the mountains, and based on that these maps are created, right? Then monitoring is done. So all these are the work of Geological Survey of India, which is a nodal agency in the context of landslides, right? Now when we talk about the, please remember these, you don't have to elaborate this, you should keep in the mind. Why specific studies? Because every landslide has its own reason, right? Now if you take the components of landslide disaster management, so always remember any components will have two. One is called as structural measures and non-structural measures. So please fix these things in the mind. Structural measures includes engineering works like geotechnology, or sometimes it also consists of natural parts like growing vegetation, planting more trees. We refer them as structural. So it means you are constructing something. We refer them as structural measures as a part of preparedness. Non-structural measures includes policy, budget, awareness, training, etc. So we refer them as non-structural measures. So any disaster management, if you are writing, you should remember what type of structural measures are there, what type of non-structural measures are there. So please keep this in the mind. Structural measures, engineering works, geotechnology, construction of the vegetation. The major idea of structural is to stabilizing the slopes. Major idea is stabilization of the slopes. Stabilization of slopes, so that the slopes become stable. Is that clear? So we refer that as the structural measures, right? So geotechnology means you are using some science in the part, like using the mesh, iron mesh, steel rods, so that the slopes are covered by the mesh and it will not fall downward. We refer them as stability by using engineering technology. Or sometimes we grow the plants so that the surface becomes rigid and it holds the debris by itself. Structural measures means you are constructing something, you are growing something, you are making some structures. And hence, in the context of that, we come across all these remediation practices, early warning systems, knowledge, network management. So all these are referred as the components. All these you can put them into two measures: non-structural measures and structural measures. Is that clear? Right. So many times, sometimes jutes are used. Sometimes it means that they should be having durable. They should have durability, and they can be used as one of the ways in which the falling mud can be packed up. Falling mud. So we refer that as stabilization of the slopes. Stabilization of the slopes. Now, recently we have seen such types of methodology has been used in Nilgiris in the state of Tamil Nadu as a pilot basis, right? So structural measures and non-structural measures. So please keep this format for any type of disaster management you are studying, right? Then early warning systems. So here when we talk about the disaster management, so here it is early warning system, which is very, very important. Now whenever when we talk about early warning system, you should always remember that these early warning systems are very important because they make the people to prepare and reduce their impact. And as this landslide is associated with precipitation also, and this precipitation or cloud bursting is weather based. So hence early warning system plays an important role here. Early warning plays an important role here. Second is preparedness. Preparedness. Now, there are certain activities where the landslides are because of earthquake. Because of earthquake. Now, there is no early warning system for earthquake. So, when there are no early warning systems, so it means you be prepared in that way. So, sometimes the areas which are vulnerable for earthquake, etc., where no early warning systems are there, where no early warning systems are there. So there you have to get prepared. You have to be prepared at all the time. Then landslide zonation map. Now this is very important part. Landslide zonation map. Now this map is developed by Geological Survey of India. Now understand this. This map is developed on the basis of degrees of landslide vulnerability. Landslide vulnerability. That is high vulnerability or low vulnerability. High vulnerability of landslides or low vulnerability of landslides. So hence it is developed on the basis of degrees of landslides. Now, what is important of this? What is important of such maps? So whenever such maps are developed or prepared, so this will help us to restrict the settlements or development activities in the areas which are high vulnerable. So it will help us to restrict the development activities or settlements. Settlements. Then it will also help us if anything is constructed in that areas. If anything you are constructing, so they should be resilient buildings. That means they should be resistant. So you should make sure that some building standards or construction standards and code should be used there. So building standards or codes should be used so that they can be resistant 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 in the sense that they should have the capacity of resist small type of vibrations. We refer them as resistance or resilience or resilience. Resilience. And also when we draw the maps, when we draw the map, so that maps helps us to understand where the deforestation areas have occurred. So this will help us to make afforestation or growing of vegetation in that area. So that will make us to understand the afforestation or vegetation growing to be taken so that the vulnerability is reduced. So hence these maps plays an important role. These maps plays an important role. So they are used in the planning purposes. So they play a very important role in planning for any type of activities, right? Then following the guidelines, and these guidelines are set by National Disaster Management Authority. Following the guidelines by National Disaster Management Authority. Then structural and non-structural measures. The same thing what I told. Structurals means it is engineering works, and non-structural means non-engineering works like budget, leadership, awareness, skills. Right. So we refer them as non-structural measures. So they will have both types of part. Is it clear? Now, something about the early warning systems. Now, early warning systems, as I told, every slope will have their own history. So, hence, a systematic study has to be done. And hence, we have taken the pilot basis to study them into two parameters. Pilot basis means as a small part. So, we are doing it region specific and site specific. Site specific. The smaller slope. So, studying slope by slope. So, here we study them slope by slope, and then we'll try to understand what is the reason for that areas. Then we take a larger area into study. We refer that as region specific. We refer that as region specific. So remember, early warning systems as a priority basis, we are making the studies. One is site specific, and second one is region specific. Larger area is taken into consideration. And in the region specific, as a pilot basis, we have selected two areas: Nilgiris from Tamil Nadu and Darjeeling from West Bengal. So from Tamil Nadu, we have selected the areas which is Nilgiris, and from West Bengal, we have selected a region called as Darjeeling. Darjeeling. So they play an important role. So one is site specific and second one is region specific. So here you have to understand that they make an effort to make an assessment why it has happening and what are the reasons for that. Right? You don't have to elaborate that. Just mention site specific and region specific. In Tamil Nadu, it is Nilgiris, and in West Bengal, it is Darjeeling. It is assessment of the previous landslides, which have already occurred, the reason behind them, and why they are becoming vulnerable. Right now, apart from these site specific and all, we are using Doppler radar systems. So these Doppler weather radar systems, they make the tracking of wind movement. So they track the wind movement, and this wind movement will help us to understand about the precipitation or rainfall in that areas, right? So these areas are located because we find the landslides are dominant in these areas. The landslides are dominant in these areas, so hence these areas are located. And apart from that, these are the areas which are vulnerable for cloud bursting. So these areas are vulnerable for cloud bursting, and they are also vulnerable for landslides. More evidences were there, so hence we have used these things, right? Apart from that, in these areas, apart from this, we also are making effort. So maybe in another month or so, there is an ongoing activities where a collaboration approach between ISRO and NASA is being done, and we are making an effort to launch a satellite called as Nisar satellite. It is a collaborative approach of India and US, that is ISRO and NASA. And this NISAR means NASA, ISRO, synthetic aperture radar. Synthetic aperture radar. Now this NISAR is having a cutting edge technology. It is having a cutting edge technology. The advantage of that is it can peer through clouds as well as dark. It can or it can pass or peer through clouds and dark, and by which it can helpful in making some accuracy or some studies of landslide, earthquake, volcano, etc. Right. So this is something which you should keep in the mind. So cutting edge means latest technology. So these all are basic terminologies. Cutting edge means we refer them as the latest technologies which are used here. Is it clear? Now, regarding the previous year's question, if I discuss what is earthquake, if I discuss what is cyclone, then you will not understand what is earthquake, what is cyclone, because at least we have to cover certain topics. Then only it becomes easy for me to discuss, and you will understand that also. If I take this question on write a note on earthquake and what is its significant impact, you don't know what is earthquake, then how you will write answer for that? So wait for at least tomorrow's class, so then we will discuss the previous year's question. Understand first, focus on understanding. If you want pyqs, then it is not that difficult to discuss pyqs, unless and until you are having certain content, how you will write that. So please understand this, right? So this is something which you have to remember in the context of uh, ISRO and NISAR. So we have making an elaborate, or we are making a collaboration, NISAR, which is a collaboration of NASA and ISRO, and by that we are launching a satellite. And this satellite NISAR is something which is an updated technology which can make the radiations, where the radiations can pass through. It is a radar, synthetic aperture radar, where the radiations can pass through the clouds as well as during the night, and they can track the movement of the lands, the movement of the vegetations in that, by which it will help us to understand the landslides, earthquake, or volcanic activities. So this is something which you have to remember. Now this R is your SNT. So sometimes if they ask, you should be very careful in mentioning those points. So focus on these. So sometimes early warning systems plays an important role. Write a note on the need and few examples of early warning systems. So this is such part. Early warning systems are beneficial only if it is weather based. Remember, early warning system is significant, or it is effective only when we are talking about any type of disaster which are extreme weather based. It is helpful in the disasters which are extreme weather based. Extreme weather based. So hence we have to understand that this plays an important role in the context of updation. Is it clear? SNT stands for science and technology. S is science and T is technology. Now the landslide zonation map, that's what I told in the beginning of the two styles. So here it is developed by Geological Survey of India. Now it is based on very high hazard, low hazard, very low hazard. So this is always built on the basis of degrees of vulnerability. Very low, very high. And based on that, the settlements, economic activities, construction activities are restricted. Allowed or restricted. This is how the maps are seen. High hazard, low hazard, moderate hazard, etc. Right? And already we have completed 90% of that. Very small portion of this Arunachal Pradesh is pending. Very small portion of Arunachal Pradesh is pending. And once that Arunachal Pradesh is also done, then we will have more clarity on the landslide. So all areas are completed. Only small area is left. No, you don't have to mention small areas left and all. You have to keep in mind what is landslide zonation mapping and what are its advantage. That is more than sufficient, right? We have explained that in detail why this map is useful, because this map helps us for planning, settlements, restricting afforestation, and taking activities which can reduce the impact of the landslides. Is it clear? So please refer these. Right now, guidelines for landslides and avalanches. The first one is updating inventory. Updating. Now, these are the guidelines which are given by National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA. Now, if UPSC asks a question, write a note on landslides and mention the guidelines. And these are the guidelines which you have to take. Or sometimes they may give, or they may ask a question, write a note on the guidelines which are given by National Disaster Management Authority. So both are the same. National Disaster Management Authority. One is updating of inventory. Inventory means all the data. So generally, as the landslides are always dominant here, so we will always have lack of data. Lack of data. right? Apart from that, the land use patterns are changing there. So what were forest, now we find agricultural activities are being. So we always find land use pattern is changing. Land use pattern is changing, right? So the same land is not relevant now. It has been used for construction, it has used for something. So in last 30-40 years, huge amount of land use has been changed. Apart from that apart from that in the context of global warming and climate change, in the context of global warming and climate change, the rainfall pattern has also changed. The rainfall pattern has changed. So hence, when the rainfall patterns have changed, when the land use patterns have changed, so you should always update the data. You should always update the inventory so that that can be assessed and used for disaster management. Then second one is landslide zonation mapping. So this zonation mapping helps us to make settlements, avoid construction activities, and make sure afforestation activities in that areas. Then studies and monitoring of selected landslides. So whenever when we make a systematic study of that area, so this will help us to make an assessment and reduce the risk. So it will reduce the risk, right? So yes, risk and crisis. So it will help in reducing the risk, and also it will help in making preparedness, right? So that's why if you are revising what has been told in the first class and second class, then you will have a good flow in the context of your subject. All the terms will remains the same, right? So reducing the risk and preparedness. Then updating of early warning systems, like you can give an example of the same using the Doppler radar, then NISAR, which can be a game changer in the context of early warning. So if you make stronger early warning system, it will be effective in risk management. So they will be effective in risk management or pre-disaster management. Pre-disaster management, because early warning system is associated with pre-disaster management. Is that clear? Then institutional measures, which includes training, awareness, coordination. Now coordination is between different departments, example police, military, and specialized forces which have been deployed there. Special forces, we refer them as national disaster response force, national disaster response force, or state disaster response force. So there should be coordination, and there should be coordination between different ministries. Third, there should be coordination between officials and local people. Officials and local people, right? So hence, when there is a proper coordination, then it will help in significantly in rescue and relief operations. So they will help in rescue and relief. They will play an important role in rescue and relief. Now training, in the sense, training you can give them in construction of small bridges, first aid, etc. So training means you can give them the trainings like first aid or construction of certain bridges, etc. Now here the local people involved will be voluntarily, you can't force them. So these local people, they will be voluntary. Local people will be voluntary. voluntary. And for them, you have to give the training. Local people, voluntary, they come forward as an humanitarian aspect. You can't force the local people to involve here. So such group of the people, such local people who are involved themselves in the disaster management, which is not mandatory, we refer them as Apada Mitras. We refer them as Apada Mitra. Apada Mitras. Yes, NISAR is an early warning system. It will plays an important role in identifying. Rather than early warning system, you can say it can help in the understanding of the land movement. Yes, you can say early warning system, but it will be game changer in the context of earthquake, because till now we don't have any type of information which can give prior signals of the earthquake. So it can be a game changer once it is launched and it becomes successful. Is it clear? So maybe certain technical issues are there. They will announce the launch of the date by this month end or next month. So once they launch, then if it becomes successful, then it can be a game changer in certain events like landslides, earthquake, volcanic activities, etc. Is that clear? So this is how you have to understand. So they have voluntary people which are referred as Apda Mitra. So there should be a coordination between these Apda Mitras, police, military, etc. Then only we can have the effective rescue and relief operations. Is that clear? So if you remember at least 60% of this also, that is sufficient for you to write very good answers in the context of your means. Right. Now, geoengineering technology or geotechnical engineering. So this has been introduced as a pilot basis last month in 2024 in Nilgiris. In Nilgiris, we have used a method called as soil nailing and hydroseeding, which is referred as geotechnology engineering. Nilgiris. So last month itself, it has been used as a pilot basis. So once it becomes successful, then we can implement in other parts. Now, the major idea of soil nailing and hydroseeding is stabilize the slopes. Is to stabilize the slopes. Those slopes. Because many slopes are there where large amount of deforestation has occurred, where the vegetation is completely removed. And as the vegetation is removed, then the soil becomes loose. The soil becomes loose. And this loose soil is vulnerable for moving downward. And hence, the areas where large amount of deforestation has occurred, we use the mesh or nets which are made up of aluminium, steel, iron, etc. And then it is punched with using the steel nails or steel rods, which is punched by using the steel rods. And by that, it will first make the stability to the slopes. It will hold the soil. We refer that as soil nailing method. Soil nailing method associated with landslide. Now, once you have made stable soils, then you have to make the growth of vegetation there. And the growth of vegetation can be a permanent solution. And for that, a technology is used which is referred as hydroseeding. Hydroseeding. And this hydroseeding is where we use a spray. And this spray is a mixture of seeds, fertilizers, and organic materials. Seeds, fertilizers, organic materials, along with water. Along with water. Seeds, fertilizers, organic material, and water. The slurry, the combination of that is sprayed. And when it is sprayed here, so this seeds and all will be held by the mesh, and then it will help in the growth of vegetation. We refer that as hydroseeding. We refer that as hydroseeding. And this hydroseeding is nothing but growing of vegetation, growing of vegetation for stabilization, slope stabilization. Stabilization. So in prelims also, if they ask, in prelims also, if they ask, if there is something called as hydroseeding work or soil nailing. Soil nailing and hydroseeding is associated with landslide management, stabilizing of the slopes, controlling of soil erosion. Is it clear? So soil nailing is, understand, a mountain is there where large amount of deforestation has occurred, and that mountain is vulnerable for landslide, vulnerable for soil erosion, because the soil in the surface is loose. Now first thing is you have to make sure that soil is attached to that, and that's why we will use the mesh or net on the surface of that mountain, on the surface of that slope. And these nets are fixed by using the steel rods. They are fixed by using the steel rods so that they can hold for some time. It means that it will make stability so that the rocks will not fall downward. The soil will not fall downward. We refer that as soil nailing method. Soil nailing method. Many highways, many areas we see that. So once the soil nailing is done, the next one is you should make certain growth of vegetation there, growth of certain grass, growth of certain plants. And this is done by a process called as hydroseeding. And hydroseeding is spray, where you spray the seeds, the fertilizers, the organic part, and the water on this mesh area, so that slowly the roots will develop, slowly the plant will grow, and we refer that as hydroseeding. So hence soil nailing and hydroseeding are two important pilot geotechnical or geoengineering methods which are used in India as a pilot basis in Nilgiris. In Nilgiris in the year 2024. Last month itself, they have started. So if it becomes successful, then we will apply it for, right. So this is before that, and this is after the process. After the process. Yes, this is a new technique, Pooja. This is a new. So that's why I told it was introduced in the year 2024. It was used in highway road construction, but for landslide management, it is used by NDMA for the first time. No, it is not Sponge City. Sponge City is totally different. Sponge City is totally different. So Sponge City means you are using only nature-based solution. You don't use a mesh, etc. This is a geoengineering method. Sponge City is natural based. In Sponge City, we don't have such. So it is generally different from that. Maybe overlapping, but that is different. This is different. Is it clear now? If they ask these two terms, soil nailing and hydroseeding, it is associated with landslide management, right? Then a small idea, if they ask Joshimat, it is a case of land subsistence. It is a case of land subsistence. And where we have seen that it was in 22 and 23. It is about land falling down. It is not about landslide, it is land subsistence. There is a difference between landslide and land subsistence. Land subsistence means sinking of land. Sinking of land. And this sinking of land can trigger landslide. This sinking of land can trigger landslide. Right. And this data is given by ISRO in the Joshimat, where the land sunk. Where the land sunk. Right. Now, the reasons which were given by them, no one reason, probably many reasons were given. So the area where the Joshimat is built is constructed on the existing area where already the landslide has occurred in the historic times. So it is built up on the slope from old landslide areas. It is built up on the slope with the deposits which are from the old landslides. which have stabilized over a period of a time. Stabilized over a period of a time. And after that, human activities are responsible for destabilizing that. Human activities, human activities have destabilized that. Destabilized that. Right. Now, what type of human activities are there? They can be construction activities, digging activities, etc. It says that the tunnel which was constructed in the Tapovan Vishnugad projects, and everybody knows this type of event which took place there, where the aquifers means the rocks beneath that. Aquifer means the rocks which were carrying the water, which stores the water. So this construction work has punctured the rocks, which is responsible for huge release of water. And this was one of the reason for making loosening of the area and collapse was done. So this is one reason which they say construction activities. Apart from that, inadequate drainage and wastage disposal systems. Drainage and wastage disposal system, which created large amount of loosening of that areas, which pushes the loose matter downward, loosening of the soil, pushing it downward, which created a land sinking, which created land sinking. Then, apart from that, the explosives which were used under construction, under construction, the highways, the projects, which created the instability, which created instability, right? Then unplanned construction, indiscriminate and unplanned robust construction. Along with that, unsustainable tourism, unsustainable tourism. So all these reasons are responsible for the huge amount of the collapse of Joshiman. And the last one they say extreme weather events, extreme weather events like heavy rainfalls, cloud burstings, etc. Cloud burstings, etc. Extreme rains and cloud burstings, which created large amount of floods, and they are also responsible for huge amount of land subsistence. So construction activities, unsustainable tourism, drilling activities, deforestation activities, and the impact of the global warming and climate change, heavy rainfalls or cloud bursting in that areas are responsible for the landslides in the Joshiman. So these are the data which are given by ISRO, which are given by ISRO. Unsustainable tourism means allowing more people than what it can hold. So if you visit Joshiman, it is something like this. A lift is having a capacity of 15 people. If you allow 50 people, then it will collapse. The same thing happened here, right? Or when the tourists moved there, so hotel industries, all construction activities were there, which destroys its carrying capacity. So unsustainable tourism, it destroyed the carrying capacity of Joshimat, right? And that is where it made collapse, right? So all these are referred as the reasons for Joshimat and its collapse. Now, probable solutions for that. What are the probable solutions? One is declare Himalayas as eco-sensitive zone. Now, these Himalayas are referred as very fragile ecosystem. It is fragile ecosystem, that is very sensitive ecosystem, and hence you declare eco-sensitive to and regulate big projects in that, restrict big projects in that area which can cause devastation, right? A detailed carrying capacity assessment should be done, and based on that number of tourists and other activities are allowed which could not make overburden in that region. Then Improve the early warning systems regarding cloud bursting, landslides, etc. Early warning systems has to be improved. Then detailed environment impact assessment has to be done. Detailed and proper environment impact assessment has to be done. So this is where sometimes like Char Dham projects, example, Char Dham project. Right. So here, any construction, any hydroelectricity project, they should always undergo a systematic environmental impact assessment. So if they do with EIA, then it will have less impact on that areas. Then control deforestation and overgrazing so that it will maintain the vegetation. Maintain the vegetation. Then the same structural and non-structural measures, geoengineering methodology, or slope stabilization and all, right? So these are the probable solutions in the context of Joshimat, right, or the Himalaya. So this you can write for entire Himalayas, not only for Joshimat, for entire Himalayas you can use if a question is asked, right? So for entire Himalayas you can use this, right? Right, so this is some rough idea about landslides and now next we move on to glacial lake outburst flood, generally referred as GLOF, glacial lake outburst flood or GLOF. Right. Now before moving down to glacial lake outburst flood, first understand a term called as the glacial lakes. The term called as glacial lakes. Right. And these glacial lakes are found in the areas where glacier deposits are there. So it means that these are found in the cryosphere, cryosphere of the earth. Cryosphere means ice deposits are there. Ice deposits are there. So in the mountain areas, in the mountain areas, where we find thick ice deposits are there. Thick ice deposits are there. Now, as the summer season starts, so these glaciers they start retreating. So these glaciers they start moving down. It means retreating. They retreat or move down. Move down. Now, when they move downward, they perform erosional and depositional landforms that you have read in your geography. Now, the erosion is done. The surface area where the rocks are there, and above that, huge glaciers when they are moving, they will erode the surface of the rock. And when the surface of rocks are eroded, so small amount of the rock debris are deposited here. So here, large sediments are deposited. So it will make temporary deposits. Temporary deposits. Temporary deposits when the glacier retreats or move downward. And these we refer them as moraines. Temporary deposits, we refer them as moraines in the glaciers. They are very temporary in the nature. Very, very temporary in the nature when they move downward. So beneath that or in the side, you will find moraines. So please remember this term, moraines. Now, as the temperature increases, the melting of the ice takes place. Now, this ice when it melts, sometimes on the upper side, sometimes on the upper side, or sometimes on the side, or sometimes beneath here, the ice melts and develop water. Ice melts and develop the water surrounding the glacier. And such water bodies, we refer them as glacial lakes. We refer them as glacial lakes, which are found on the high altitude mountains. So such types of the glacial lakes are found in high altitude mountains, even in the Arctic and Antarctic. And here we are talking about the Himalayan region, which is associated with India. So large amount of Hindu Kush Himalayan regions are there. We find such, yes, in the Himalayas where we see. So we refer them as glacial lakes. Now, with the development of the human perspectives like global warming and climate change, so this is accelerating the melting of glacier, accelerating the melting of glacier, and that is creating more number of glacial lakes, which is creating more glacial lakes, more glacial lakes, right? Now, sometimes, maybe for any reason, maybe for any reason, any reason, when the lakes breaks, or when the glacier cracks, or when this huge amount of accumulated water is moved downward because of breaking of the lakes, when these glacial lakes, when they break, many reasons are there. So large amount of water moves downward. Whatever water is accumulated will move downward. And when the lakes break, so this breaking of the event associated with those lakes, we refer them as glacial lakes. And when they break, they will create a type of a floods, and we refer them as flash floods. Downward flash floods, we refer them as glacial lake outburst flood. Glacial lake outburst flood, sorry, glacial lake outburst flood, right? And such types of glacial lake outburst floods are predominant in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, as they have increased due to the impact of global warming and climate change. Is it clear? So please remember these perspective. Glacial lake, and when these glacial lakes breaks, they create a glacial lake outburst flood. Is that clear? So first understand what are glacial lakes. Then we talk about glacial lake outburst floods. Right. So this is how the glacial lakes are there. This is a glacial lake. This is a glacial lake. Right. So sudden release of water, which is accumulated in the glacier downward, which creates flash floods. We refer that as the glacial lake outburst flood. And this has accelerated due to the impact of global warming and climate change. And if you see the data, if you see the data, so in the context of India, we are talking about India. So the glacier deposits in India are found along Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh, two union territories, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Ladakh region here, where we find the ice deposits. And this is along the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And the three major rivers which are associated with India are Brahmaputra river system, Ganga river system, and Indus river system. So Brahmaputra river basin, then we have Ganga river basin system and Indus river system, where we find large amount of glacial lakes have been developed. And because of global warming and climate change, they are increasing. These glacial lakes are increasing due to global warming and climate change. They are increasing in the numbers. So this is the factual part, the glacial lakes. Now, what is the reason for the glacial lake outburst floods? Or what is the impact of the glacial lake outburst floods? right? Now, first we'll understand the reason for the glacial lake outburst floods, or the factors which contribute to that. Now, the first one is, as the temporary lakes are created by moraines. So these moraines are temporary deposits. So here, temporary deposits. So they are not permanent, right? So whenever the high moraines are constructed, as the water accumulates there, so they will breach that. They will break the moraines. They will breach the moraine and they flow downward, because these moraines are temporary in the nature. So moraines are rock or soil sediments. Moraines means they are rock or soil sediments which are deposited by the glacier. So they are very temporary in the nature. If the volume of water increases, so the water will breach. The water will breach the moraine and move downward. We refer that as the moraines, which create a temporary dams there. And then suddenly it breaks and enters, because as the volume increases, so these moraines will not support. They are temporarily created by the ice deposits. Then sometimes earthquakes. So whenever earthquake takes place, the glaciers will break. The glaciers will break. Then frictions in the Himalayas. As the Indian plate has subducted, so frictions can also trigger the surface of the glacier, which can break. Then slope gradient. Now here we find steep slopes are there. Steep slopes. So hence these glaciers are not very stable, and hence these moraines are also not stable, which can lead to the impact on breaking of that. Then deforestation, construction activities, etc., where it has removed the vegetation and added large amount of carbon, black carbon and brown carbon, right? Black carbon and brown carbon, which makes the melting of the glacier. Then global warming and climate change, which has increased the average temperature of the earth. Then heavy rainfall. If the region is having heavy rainfall, or say cloud bursting, which can trigger the clouds. Now this we have seen example in the context of Sikkim in the year 2023. So in the Sikkim, we had a cloud bursting here, and this cloud bursting occurred on a lake called as Lonak Lake, Sikkim. The cloud bursting occurred on the lake here, the glacial lake, which is referred as Lonak Lake. And this Lonak Lake was unable to hold the water, the ice there, and this made the flow downward, which is referred as the Glof. So the glacial lake burst flood of Sikkim is because of cloud bursting on Lonak Lake. Lonak Lake. Now, soil liquefaction. Soil liquefaction is also one of the reason where the soil loses its rigidity, where the soil loses its rigidity and behaves like liquid. We refer that as soil liquefaction, and soil liquefaction is also one of the reason for the glacial lake outburst floods. So these are the factors which makes the globs in the Himalayan region. We are making the study of Himalayan perspective, right? Now this is what the Sikkim episode. So please remember 2023 Sikkim, and this is that lake called as Lonak Lake. Lonak Lake, because of heavy rainfall, cloud bursting was the main event. And this cloud bursting on this lake, that is Lonak Lake, and this Lonak Lake broke away. We refer that as GLOF, Glacial Lake Outburst Flood. And this GLOF created flash floods in Sikkim. In Sikkim, right? So, series of events, cloud bursting followed by GLOF, right? So, this is where we find the Lonak Lake is responsible for huge losses in the Sikkim, huge losses in the Sikkim. Is that clear now? Sikkim episode. They may ask in prelims or sometimes in the mains as well. Now, impacts of GLOF. Impacts means what losses are there? It will create flash floods, landslides, and soil erosion. So the top soils are reduced here. Loss of properties and infrastructures. Then displacement of the people and displacement of the animals is a major problem. And whenever heavy rainfalls are there, whenever flash floods are there, plants will destroy. Fauna means animals will wash out. Injuries or death to the animals, and human life, injuries or death. So here when we say flora and fauna, flora means plants, but for animals and human beings, injury and death. Then psychological impacts will be there. We refer them as trauma. So the person who has seen that image will be always in his mind. So we refer that as psychological trauma, right? So if any mountains are there, steep mountains means the gradients are very high. So always remember, this is steep mountain and these are gentle mountains. This is steep mountain and this is gentle mountain. So in the steep mountains, whenever the glacier has accumulated, so it will develop more moraines as it moves downward. So in the steep slopes, the glacier retreat will be fast. It will move down more. So hence, as the glacier moves downward, what will happen to the temperature? Will it increase or decrease? When the glacier moves downward, Ramandeep, the temperature increase or decrease when you move downward? When you move downward, because of steep slopes, the glacier will move downward if the slopes are steep, right? So when the temperature increases, then it will increase the accumulation of water because of melting. So this is where the steep slopes and its part. So it will decrease the stability and hence it will increase the impact. So these are referred as the impacts of the glacial lake outburst floods. Is that clear? So factors, impacts. Now, National Disaster Management Guidelines for Reducing GLOF. So we'll just understand this and then we can have a break of 10 minutes. First one is identifying and mapping the dangerous lakes. So when we have such types of events, you should always make data of past events. So identify past events. And in the Himalayas, we always find the lakes which are referred as the tectonic lakes, like Ular Lake is a tectonic lake. Ular Lake in Kashmir is a tectonic lake. So hence identifying the geotectonic lakes, geotectonic, that is plate movements. Example, Ular. Now in the same way, the rivers can also create oxbow lakes there, and we refer them as geomorphological lakes. Geotectonic lakes and geomorphological lakes. So you should make the lakes which are geotectonic and geomorphological lakes. Geomorphological means which are created by the river. And geotectonic means plate movement. Example, Ular Lake, Dal Lake, right? Geotectonic lakes. Then second, use of technology like synthetic aperture radar imagery, which is SAR. Now, the idea of this is it automatically detect the rise of water. It automatically detect the rise of water in the existing lakes, or it also detect if any new lake is created by global warming, or detect new lake formation, new lake which is created by the impact. So such technologies are referred as radars, synthetic aperture radar. It automatically detect the rise, so it means it is a dangerous one. And then new lakes also it will identify, right? Then structural measures. So what type of structural measures are here? So here it is about the water which is accumulated. So hence, in the context of structural measures, rather than allowing the entire water to move downward, allow small water downward. We refer that as a controlled breaching of the water. So the first one is controlled breaching of water. Controlled breaching. So allow the small water to move down. So rather than huge water which can accumulate, right? Then second one is you can use the electric pumps and all, which can electric pumps, or sometimes which is done on diesel, etc. So pumping the water through tunnels. Second one is pumping the water, pumping the water through tunnels, right? So that volume of water is reduced. So when the volume is reduced, it will not have high pressure on the moraines, it will not have huge impact when the lakes breaks, right? Then next one is uniform codes for construction. So here we have to use uniform codes and construction which can restrict the construction activities, which can restrict construction activities which are dangerous in that areas, right? Or sometimes construction activities in sensitive areas, activity in sensitive areas, or prohibit settlements, prohibit settlements which are vulnerable for that areas. Then enhancing early warning systems, you should use the same part. So enhance early warning system by using the technologies like the Doppler radars or NISAR, which may be in the future, not now, future, right? So enhancing early warning system. Then training the manpower, that means you provide them training in first aid, constructing shelters, constructing the bridges, etc. And these manpowers, we refer them as Apda Mitras. Apda Mitras. Is it clear? So these are the National Disaster Management Guidelines which are associated with the GLOVs. Is it clear? Controlled breaching means if this is an area where large water is accumulated, so you will allow the water slowly to move from that, not entire water. So make the passage and allow small channel of water so that it will not have huge impact on the down area. So controlling small amount of water, we refer that as controlled breaching. Is it clear? So this is what we refer them as National Disaster Management Guidelines in the context of the GLOVs, right? So you can have a break, then we'll start the class at 6:45. 6:45. See, Nisar is a satellite which is which is planned to be launched, and in the context of disaster management, it is a synthetic aperture radar. SAR is synthetic aperture radar, which is very important in detecting the movement of the land. And the advantage is that it can detect them even during the night. even during the clouds. So that is more than sufficient for your disaster management. And its technical specification and all, it is linked to your science and technology part here. ISRO and NASA. ISRO is Indian Space Research Organization, and NASA is organization of USA. Okay, so you can have a break. We'll start the class at 6:45. Welcome after the break. So, hope I am audible as well as visible to you all, right? Please confirm that I am audible as well as visible. Done. So now we move on to heat waves. Heat waves. Now, if you see the heat waves perspective, one thing you should remember: if we take the Earth, we always know that the maximum temperature is there at the equator and decreases as we move towards the poles. So the insolation is not uniform. Insolation, that is incoming solar radiation, is not uniform. Plus, many factors are responsible for the temperature, that is coastal area, plain areas, altitudes, etc. Many factors are there which defines the temperature of that areas. So hence there are different criteria to define the heat wave. So hence we are having different criteria because it varies from equator towards the poles. Plus it also has an impact on coastal climatic conditions, altitude, normal lapse rate, desert areas, etc. So hence different criteria are used. So you don't have any uniformity in the context of heat waves. And as there are many complex definitions are there. But according to the World Meteorological Department or World Meteorological Organization, it has used one criteria that any area where the average temperature, if it is increased to 5 degrees centigrades or more continuously for 5 days, then that particular area is referred as heat waves. This is according to World Meteorological Organization. This is 5 or more consecutive days during which the daily maximum temperature exceeds the average maximum temperature by 5 degrees. 5 degrees. So if this area is A, which is having a temperature of 30 degrees centigrade, that is maximum average temperature. If it becomes 36 degrees continuously for 5 days or more, then that particular area A is referred as experiencing the heat waves, experiencing heat waves with reference to World Meteorological Organization definition. Right. Now, if we take the heat waves parameters, globally, the heat waves have increased on the global perspective because of emission of large amount of greenhouse gases, large amount of greenhouse gases which have been accumulated, plus large amount of carbon which has been accumulated, black carbon, brown carbon which has accumulated, that is burning of the biomass, etc. So this in turn is responsible for increasing average temperature of an earth. We refer that as global warming. Global warming. And changing of the patterns for a longer period, we refer that as climate change. Climate change. So we find global warming and climate change has occurred. And this is responsible for increasing, it is responsible for increasing the magnitude, area of operation, intensity, severity. If you are reading current affairs, Delhi is experiencing more than 50 degrees centigrade. Severity, intensity. Mecca, the pilgrimage, where more than 500 people collapsed. Severity, intensity, or area of operation. So magnitude has increased, intensity has increased, plus The number of occurrences of heat waves have also increased. We refer that as frequency. Frequency. So, because of global warming and climate change, it has increased in area. They are becoming very, very severe. So, those areas where the temperature was not reaching 50, now they are experiencing 51 degrees centigrade. And it is occurring again and again, which is occurring again and again. So, hence, the global warming and climate change has increased all its characteristics, magnitude, intensity, and frequency. Now, apart from that, if you take the vulnerability profile is not uniform. Vulnerability is not uniform. It varies from rich to poor. So poor are most affected. It varies from rich and poor. It varies from rural and urban and urban. It varies from young population and old population, young people and old population. It varies from healthy to weak person, healthy person and weak person. So vulnerability profile is not uniform. It is not uniform. So hence, it is one of the major cause of concern along the worlds. In all the world, we find the same, and that is same with reference to India. Same reference to India. So hence, as the vulnerability profile is not uniform, so hence casualties always vary in the proportion with reference to rich, poor, young, old. All these we find they are associated with the impact of heat waves. Is that clear? So this is some introduction part about the heat waves. Now, how we calculate that in the context of India? In the India, the heat waves are calculated, but first on the basis of whether it is plain area, mountain area, or coastal area. So, in the context of India, we have coastal, we have mountain areas, and plain areas. So, if the maximum temperature at least 40 degrees centigrades in the plain areas like UP, Bihar, etc., 40 degrees in the plain areas, or at least 37 degrees in the coastal areas, in the coastal areas, or in the mountains like Uti, or in the northern areas where the temperature decreases with the height, a factor which contributes to that. So at least 30 degrees on the hilly areas, on the hilly areas, Uti, etc. So if this temperature reaches 40, 37, or 30 in the plain, coastal, and hilly areas, then we define that as heat waves. Heat waves. Second, based on departure from the normal temperature. Normal temperature. Now, it is referred as heat waves when the departure is in between 4.5 to 6.4. That is, if any area is having, say, 30-degree centigrade average temperature. So, if the temperature in that area increases to 34.5 degrees up to 36.4 degrees centigrade, then we refer that as heat waves. Heat waves. In this area A, we refer that as heat waves. And if the temperature increases to more than 6.4 degrees, that is, if it is 36.5 degrees centigrade or 37 degrees centigrade, then we refer that as severe heat waves. We refer this as severe heat waves. A simple definition. Right. See, the vulnerability profile will not be same for every disaster. I have explained vulnerability. Please read that slide and then again you analyze your thoughts. It is not uniform. So vulnerability changes within the communities. Please understand that statement. Then it is on the basis of actual maximum temperature for the plains. It is referred as heat waves when the temperature of that area reaches to 45 degree centigrade. You don't have to wait for 5-degree variations. The moment when it reaches to 45 absolute temperature, it is absolute temperature 45, then we refer that as the heat waves. Or when it is more than or equal to 47 degrees, then we refer that as severe heat waves. Absolute values absolute values, that is 45 degrees centigrade or 47 degrees centigrade or above. So the temperature of 51 in Delhi invariable, it is referred as severe heat waves. The temperature in Rajasthan 51 degrees invariable is severe heat waves. 48 degrees is extreme heat waves. Yes, like Delhi and Punjab, we come across them. So we refer them as the heat waves. Is it clear? So in the normal, it is simple. If it is exceeding that value, if any area is having a average temperature, if the value is 4.5 to 6.4, more than that normal value, we refer that as heat waves. If the value is exceeding 6.4 of the average, then we refer that as severe heat waves. So please read these facts, read these factuals, which are very important sometimes when they use the criterias. And every part of India is experiencing this now, including Delhi, northwestern part, and sometimes we come across even the northeastern regions are also have seen, and large casualties were there during election. Why? Because large people were suffered by this. Vulnerability is not same. Weak people, old people, aged people, they easily suffocate with the heat waves. Right. Now, in the context of India, we always find the heat waves are predominant during the pre-monsoon days. In the pre-monsoon days, where we find rainfall is comparatively less. So pre-monsoon days are something which are associated with heat waves in India. Right. So it is before the onset of southwest monsoon. So this is southwest monsoon, and this is northeast monsoon. Northeast monsoon, and winter days where we are having western disturbances. Western disturbances. Right. So in the pre-monsoon, we are something which is pre-monsoon showers. Right. So if the pre-monsoon showers are there, then the heat waves will be less. Now this year, pre-monsoon showers were very less, and that is the reason why large temperatures increased in many patches in the Himalayas, in the Kashmir, sorry, in the Delhi, northern plains, Bihar, all the areas where there was no pre-monsoons, and sometimes delay in the monsoon make the conditions very worst. Delay in southwest monsoon. So that also makes the condition very, very worst in the context of the heat waves. Now, in the present part, one is global warming, then delay in the southwest monsoon, and also less pre-monsoon showers during that phase, which makes the conditions very worst in India. Worst in India. And this we have already seen in many areas. For example, if we take Mecca, the pilgrimage part, so more than 600 casualties have been seen this year in 2024. In spite of making all the arrangements, large amount of deaths were there in Mecca. Right. So many reasons contribute to that, but the major thing is the average temperature, which is increasing in the perspective of globe. Right. Now, favorable conditions for the heat waves. One is that prevalence of hot air in that areas. So whenever hot airs are there, so that region will always have flow of the hot temperatures, because if any air is having moisture, so the moisture will reduce the temperature of that area, and that can lead to formation of pre monsoon showers. Right. So here the absence of moisture or the hot air continuously, it is just like an oven where the temperature keep on accumulating, and that air is having absence of moisture, which cannot create the clouds. absence of moisture, it means that no cloud formation, and hence that will delay the rainfall pattern, delay the monsoon, pre-monsoon part. And if the clouds are, sorry, if it is cloudless, what happens? So generally, when we talk about the clouds, now these clouds have albedo, they have high albedo. It means 27 percentage of insolation is reflected back by the clouds. Just read your heat budgets. 27% is reflected by the clouds, right? So in the pre-monsoon showers, if these clouds are absent, that is cloudless, if these clouds are absent, then more amount of insolation will reach to the earth, more amount of insolation will reach, and this insolation will heat the earth stronger, and more terrestrial radiation, and this terrestrial radiation will increase the temperature, and this is what happened this year also. So cloudless conditions, because clouds can reflect the insolation. So 27% of the insolation is reflected by the clouds. So please read your heat budget. So in the heat budget, 35 percentage is albedo. In that, 27 is by clouds, 6 by the atmosphere, and 2 by the ice caps. So clouds plays an important role in the albedo of the earth. Albedo of the earth. Right. Now, thus clouds, when they're absent, more insolation, more heating, more insolation, more heating. Right. So this is one which you have to remember. Is that clear? Kal Baisakhi. So Kal Baisakhi is pre-monsoon thunderstorm, which is seen in the context of West Bengal. So it is pre-monsoon thunderstorm. It is an example of thunderstorm, but pre-monsoon, pre-monsoon thunderstorm. In the West Bengal, we have that, right? Kal Baisakhi, right? So it is thunderstorm, extreme rainfall associated with the cumulonimbus clouds in the West Bengal region. Is that clear? Okay. Then large amplitude of anticyclone. So whenever anticyclones are there, anticyclone is a region of high pressure center. So this will push the warm air to spread. So this will make the warm air or hot air to spread. And that is where it increases the rainfall. Yes, pre-monsoon shower. In Assam, you have that Bodila, or we find coffee showers. All these are referred as pre-monsoon showers, right? Coffee showers are there, cherry blossoms are there, right? So Barodoli Chira we find. So all these are there, which are something which associated with the decreasing of the temperature. So that's why if you are reading your NCRT books, they say pre-monsoon showers are heat induced and they bring relief from high temperature whenever pre-monsoon showers are there. I'm repeating, if you are reading your NCRTs, there the statement says that these pre-monsoon showers are always in the afternoon or late evening. Why? Because there are certain criteria which are referred as convectional rainfall. So the moment when pre-monsoon showers are there, immediately they give relief from high temperature in that areas. So that is the statement which you should remember in the context of your examination or NCRT. Is that clear? So pre-monsoon showers will have an impact on that. So these are the favorable conditions for the heat waves, right? So basics of geography are important in this. Then color codes are used in defining the heat waves. So please read them, and don't by heart everything. So we use yellow color, orange color, yellow, orange. Yellow means heat alert, and these are the activities: avoid heat exposure, wear light clothes, cover your head, etc. Orange, severe heat, right? So severe heat waves condition persisting for 2 days, criteria which are given, right? And here it can lead to many, so you have to use many aspects like using ORS, avoid alcohols, body will be always dehydrated, so you should always use these actions. They're very simple. Don't make research on that. So color codes are used: green, yellow, orange, and red alert. So that's why if you are reading current affairs, Delhi is under red alert. Delhi was on red alert where the temperature reaches to 50 degrees. Bihar, red alert, right? So where extreme conditions were there and such waves which were persisting for more than 2 waves. And here they can have a huge impact on developing illness and heart strokes in all ages. So many people collapse during election duty, right? So it can trigger such type of heat strokes, and which can lead to suffocation, which can lead to deaths, which can lead to deaths, right? So this is how you should remember these things. uh, Yes, because of the wind patterns have been affecting this. So if you take the Kal Baisakhi, it is not about the rain, it is about the pattern which has been also changing. So if the Kal Baisakhi is regular, then it will help. See, if you are from West Bengal, you always talk about one more rice season which is there associated with the Kal Baisakhi. So generally, in the context of all the parts of India, rice is cultivated twice in a year. But in West Bengal, because of Kal Baisakhi, one more rice season is there. We refer that as 3 seasons of rice, which is Haman, Os, and Boro. Right. So this Boro is a significant impact, what we refer them as Kal Baisakhi. So Kal Baisakhi is very significant. It is called as thunderstorm, pre-monsoon thunderstorm, which is accompanied by what we refer them as cumulonimbus clouds. Kal Baisakhi, Vaishak month of Hindu calendar. And it is very systematically referred and explained by Rabindranath Tagore in his novels. And this is the most violent wind in the pre-monsoons in the context of India. Is it clear? Cloud will absorb terrestrial radiation. See, cloud will absorb terrestrial radiation. That is true. But when the clouds itself are absent, so it will make huge amount of insolation. That insolation will first create heating. That insolation will create heating. Then second is when we talk about the clouds. So if the clouds, again here you should remember, when we talk about terrestrial radiations and all, if high clouds are there, if high clouds are there, then these high clouds will absorb terrestrial radiation. So there is two aspects of clouds are there, Akshay. One is that if you are talking about low clouds and high clouds, so these high clouds will absorb terrestrial radiation. Low clouds will have less absorption of terrestrial radiation. So high clouds are something which are responsible for increasing the temperature. Is that clear? So okay. Yes, Ammon. Sorry, Ammon. Sorry, not Boro. It is Ammon. So it idea is that it is very important for economic activities in that areas. So this is something which is current affairs, and also your flow you should maintain that, right? Is that clear, Akshay, regarding the clouds? Low altitude clouds and high altitude clouds. So your answer is if it is high altitude clouds, then it will absorb more amount of terrestrial radiations. You should be very clear in your basics of geography. Then it becomes easy for you to answer any such questions which are asked in the examinations. Right. Then next is measures to minimize the impact. So these are very simple. It means that you should avoid going to the sun, especially between 12 to 3, because this is a time where the terrestrial radiations are stronger, and this terrestrial radiations heats the atmosphere, or it warms the atmosphere. So highest temperature of the earth is always between 2 to 3 p.m. Highest temperature is between 2 to 3 p.m., right? Then wear light clothes, drink as much as water possible. Then avoid strenuous activities. Avoid walking outside in between 12 to 3 because the high terrestrial radiation. While traveling, carry water with you. Don't use carbonated soft drinks, etc. Avoid high protein food so that you can't digest. So this high protein food, it is difficult to digest. Difficult to digest. Then If you're working outside, make sure that you are using umbrellas and all. Don't leave children's or pets in the parked vehicle, right? So use oral rehydration syrup. Dehydration, use ORS packets when large amount of dehydrations are there, lassis, etc. Is that clear? So keep animals in the shade, give them as much as water when they are thirsty, right? So all these are referred as the measures which are taken in the context of the heat waves, right? Apart from this, these all are facts. Please read them carefully. Read them carefully. No scientific analysis is required. Apart from that, many state governments have developed heat action plans. Action plans. Now, again, these heat action plans are not mandatory. So, these heat action plans they includes pre-disaster, that is early warning system and proper medication facilities. So, hence, in the heat action plans, they should have early warning system and emergency response plan. If the temperature increases, what should be done? Then they should have a public awareness and community. So, it is where the capacity of public knowledge is increased along with having medical professionals then reducing heat exposure and promoting adaptive measures like planting more amount of spraying waters, right, making some shelters, and in long term planting trees long term planting trees, afforestation, which can be very, very beneficial. So we refer them as the heat action plan. So if UPSC asks that, so you should be good enough in mentioning the heat action plans, which consist of early warning systems, public awareness, increasing the capacity, and reducing heat exposure and promoting adaptive measures. So adaptive measures are planting the trees. So in Mecca and all, in spite of having that spraying waters, big fans are used, but in spite of that, large amount of casualties occurred. So we refer them as heat action plan. So every state will have their own action plans. Why? Because every state's average temperature are different. If you take the average temperature of Rajasthan, it is not same as the average temperature of the what we say Telangana. It is not same as that of Kerala. So every state will have their own action plans. Every state will have their own action plans, state action plans, right? So this is what you should be remembering. See why you are not affected, because resistance is more. Your resistance is more. But you should be careful when you talk about or when you are doing your physical exercise. It can create cramps where the body will become very much fatigued if high temperatures are there, right? Then symptoms and first aids. Heat rashes will be there. And what is the first aid to that? Then cramps, suddenly the body cramps. So many times when we talk about the players, when they are making or when they are running or when they are making fieldings in cricket, we find a player develops a heat cramps. So that is where you should make sure that his muscles are gently massaged to relieve the pain. So heat cramps will be there, heat exhaustion, heat strokes, and this is what seen in the Delhi episode. Large heat strokes were there, and the moment when heat strokes were there, it will create mental trauma and unconsciousness will be there. We refer them as heat strokes, sunburns, etc. And this is where extreme worst conditions are seen here. And victim will not sweat also whenever high strokes are there. So this is where we talk about something called as symptoms associated with the first aid and the heat disorders, right? Now, apart from that, you have to understand something called as wet bulb temperature. Now this is very simple. Focus on understanding. Focus on understanding and remember that in the context of India, Indian Meteorological Department do not use the wet bulb temperature to define heat waves. It do not use the wet bulb temperature to define heat waves. heat waves. Right. Now here understand this. Human body, human body, it always cools when evaporation takes place from the body. That means when the body sweats, that is, when the body sweats, after that, evaporation, which makes the cooling of the body. Cooling is done, which is evaporation. That is a natural process of cooling, natural process of cooling the body. So that's why whenever summer seasons are there, the moment when the fans are started, so fans will increase the evaporation from your body, so you will have a cooling sensation, because more evaporation, more cooling sensation to the bodies, to the body. So it is a natural way of keeping the body temperature, that is evaporation, that is evaporation. Right. Now understand that if any air is there, if any air is there, if its temperature is very high, if its temperature is high, then body's natural mechanism is to sweat and bring the condition into normalcy, bring the condition into normalcy. Now along with high temperature, along with high temperature, now the deadly combination is moisture. Deadly combination is moisture. If any air is there, and if it is having moisture, if it is having moisture, now understand this. If you are having two towels, dry towel and wet towel, and if you dip them in the water body, which towel will absorb more water, dry towel or wet towel? Which towel will absorb more water? Right. Dry will absorb more water, right, and wet will not absorb. In the same case, if the moisture is more in the air, so it means that air is already wet, and when the air is wet, then body's natural tendency of evaporation decreases. I'm repeating, if the air is having high temperature plus the moisture, so body will not sweat. It means that its normal temperature, sorry, normal process of evaporation is disturbed. So whenever the moisture is high, so it will decrease the evaporation, it will the evaporation reduce evaporation. And such conditions, when the evaporation is reduced, then the body's natural tendency of cooling decreases, and that person, that human being, that animal undergoes suffocation, and that will lead to death, that will lead to death. So this is when we take the moisture along with the temperature, and when you calculate that, we refer that as wet bulb temperature. So this temperature of the air, this temperature of the air, which includes temperature plus moisture, temperature and moisture, and then you take a reading, we refer this as wet bulb temperature. Now how this reading is taken? You have to take a thermometer and wrap the thermometer with a cloth which is dipped in the water. You wrap or cover the thermometer by a cloth which is dipped in water or wet cloth. Dry thermometer, wrap that, cover that entire thermometer with a wet cloth. And then when you take the reading of that, we refer that as wet bulb temperature. And this reading is referred as wet bulb temperature. Is that clear? Now, this wet bulb temperature is not the same as what you get in the dry air temperature. So, the dry air temperature may be 40, 41, 42, but the wet bulb temperature may be 28, 27, etc. That will not harm much. That will not harm much. But if the wet bulb temperature reaches to 30 degrees centigrade, if the wet bulb temperature reaches to 30 degrees centigrade, then it will start harming the human body. This is where the harm takes place. And from 30 degrees to 35 degrees centigrade, it is considered as a major problem to the human body. So between 30 to 35 degrees, the human body undergoes hyperthermia, and which can lead to discomfort and multiple impacts on the organs, including brain and heart. This is what happened in Delhi. This is what happened in many areas. So hence, you should be very careful when you are playing, when you are saying that the temperature is 40, 45. Luckily, the wet bulb temperature might have been 25, 26. So that's why it will not have much fatal. But if the temperature is high, along with that, if the wet bulb temperature is more than 30, then that is where the conditions are. And this year, if we take in Maharashtra, the wet bulb temperature recorded was 31.2 degrees centigrade. And many parts in Delhi also experienced such conditions. And that's why these wet bulb temperatures are to be recorded. So, in spite of having all the advantages and all, Indian Meteorological Department do not uses the wet bulb temperature to define the criteria of heat waves. Again and again, I am telling, in India, in India, they don't use the wet bulb temperature. So many environmentalists are pressurizing that why don't we use the wet bulb temperature to understand that, because many parameters are here. So maybe they may use in the later stage, but today we don't use. And apart from that, the Indian Meteorological Department has come up with the two conditions: warm night conditions and hot, humid weather conditions. But no exact definitions are given. Maybe in another month or so, they may give this. So they are not given, they are not clearly defined. What do you mean by the warm night conditions and hot, humid weather conditions? They are not given exactly what it means. Is it clear? So why wet bulb is not used? They will not ask question on that. They will not ask question why it is not used. Maybe some constraint with data, maybe some constraint with other parameters, right? But remember first, the science aspect of human body, the science aspect of human body, where he cools, where the body cools by sweating or evaporation. And wet bulb temperature is when you calculate the temperature of an air, keeping the hotness plus the moisture in the air. We refer that as wet bulb temperature. And the wet bulb temperature above 30 are dangerous. Wet bulb temperature above 30 degrees are dangerous. Is that clear? Right. So hence, whenever when we talk about when you talk about the sessions and all, when you're playing cricket and all, you should be careful that you should not take only temperatures criteria. You should check the wet bulb temperature also. If the wet bulb temperature is high, without knowingly you will have such conditions. So hence, be careful with your life, be careful with yourself when you're taking, right? So it is not referred as heroic deeds, it's about stupidity in spite of knowing when we do the mistakes. Is it clear? So please understand these perspectives when we talk about any type of temperatures. Is that clear? I hope it is clear now when we talk about the wet bulb temperature and the normal. Is it clear now? So hence you should remember at least that the temperature of that area may be 50 degrees, but you don't know that what is the wet bulb temperature of that region. So in Rajasthan and all, the moisture may not be there. So hence your body was adjusted there. If the moisture would also increases there, then the conditions become dangerous. Is that clear? So be careful with your all types of physical activities, because you don't know, this is a hidden thing, wet bulb temperature. Nobody measures that, and it is revealed only when the casualties are there. Is that clear now? Right. So be careful with your activities and life. Right now. So this is all about wet bulb temperature, its science behind and perspectives. The values are 30 and 35. The normal thermometer, when you cover that with saturated water cloth, normal thermometer, see, normal thermometer will have a temperature of 40 degrees. right? Now, the immediately if you cover that with a wet cloth, what will happen to the temperature of that? Will it be again 40 or it will be less than that, right? So that temperature is called as wet bulb temperature. Is that clear? So please remember these things. See, Sakshi, when you talk about that, you should be very careful because you don't know about the conditions which are there. You have to convince them. You have to tell them because it is not safe. Because see, when you are reading in your geography perspectives, 2 to 3 is something where the temperatures, the terrestrial radiations are very high. So it is better to have the morning session or in the evening session, or sometimes when you are practicing them with the roofs, when the shade is there, that is well and good. But if you are practicing them in the open ground, that is fatal and dangerous. If you are practicing them in the open ground, that is very dangerous. But nowadays we find the practicing sessions are there which are having the indoor stadium. So if you are practicing them in the indoor stadium, you won't have much problem. But when you are practicing them under the sun, that becomes a dangerous part, right? Now, cold waves, the same thing when we talk about the cold waves is also there. Whatever criteria is applied for the heat waves, the same we will have the cold waves also, right? Now, in the context of cold waves, the same parameters: minimum temperature 10 degrees or less in the plain, and 0 degrees for hilly areas. Hilly areas, 10 degrees Celsius and 0 degrees. The departure, always remember this value. If it is 4.5 to 6.4 addition, then it is heat waves. 4.5 to 6.4 addition, that is heat waves. If 4.5 to 6.4 reducing, then we refer that as cold waves. Departure means minus. Departure means minus. If it is increasing, that is heat waves. If it is decreasing, then it is cold waves, right? And if it is less than 0.6, 0.5 degrees less, then we refer that as the severe cold waves. Severe heat waves and severe cold waves. Is that clear? So this is the criteria. Apart from that, a general criteria is that whenever there is a departure of minus 4.5 in the stations, we refer that as the cold. Or if it is 15 degrees centigrades, we refer them as cold. So in the coastal areas generally the temperatures are more. Why? Because in the coastal areas we always find the waters which are there, water, and water always takes more time to heat, and water also takes more time to cool here. So hence in the coastal areas 15 degrees is considered as the cold waves. 15 degrees is considered as the cold. So any of the definition you can use. Don't make research on that. Just read the facts and keep them in the mind. Because in the coastal areas, we find the impact of water is seen. Land warms also very faster, cools also very faster. And that means that if the land is cooler, then the warm water will add more temperature here. So in the coastal areas, generally we find the temperature is higher than that of the plain areas. So that's why coastal areas are suitable for settlements. And moreover, in the coastal areas, you don't find the difference between the highest temperature and lowest. So it means they are having very low diurnal temperature, low diurnal temperature range. It means that there is no difference between the highest temperature and the lowest temperature of a day. Is that clear? Early warning systems, yes, they are, and I told you that all extreme weather based conditions, they will have early warning system. They will have early warning systems. Now in the context of the cold waves, right? So the most areas which are affected by the cold waves are the northwestern part of India, and then plains of India. Plains of India. So it is northwestern part and plains of India which are affected by the cold waves. And always remember, these cold waves are also increased due to the impact of global warming and climate change. This is a normal one. So due to global warming and climate change, we find their magnitude, intensity, and frequency have increased. So because of global warming, M stands for magnitude, I stands for intensity, and F stands for frequency. So we find their magnitude, intensity, and frequency have been increased. Now, in the year 2023, India experienced, or the northwestern part of India, including the plains, they experienced extreme cold conditions. Now, the reasons given for that, the reasons for extreme colds in the 2023, the first one is the lack of active western disturbances. Lack of active western disturbances. So these disturbances, they bring the moisture laden winds from the Caspian Sea and all, which brings the warming effect and precipitation, right? So lack of active western disturbances, so moistures, a rainfall would have decreased, which have made and decreased the impact of cold perspectives, right? So the warm air was minus because of lack of active. uh, Second one is during 2023 and 22, we always seen that that is a region 2023, or before that we had a phase of La Nina phase, but in the mid of 223 we have entered into El Nino phase. El Nino phase in the year 2023 mid. So that is an year where triple dip La Nina ended. So triple dip, triple dip La Nina ended and El Nino started. El Nino started. Triple dip La Nina means continuously for 3 years, 20, 21, 21, 22, 22, 23. For 3 years, 3 years, there was La Nina. We refer that as triple dip La Nina. We refer that as triple dip La Nina. After that, El Nino was there. Third one is because of the presence of strong jet stream. The strong jet stream. So this strong jet stream was responsible for subsistence or pushing the cold air downward. Jet stream was responsible for pushing or subsistence of cold air downward, and hence they were responsible for the cold conditions in the year 2023, right? So this year they may be same reasons or they may be separate reasons, but this is the reasons for 2023, right? So please remember these associated with your geographical perspectives. Now what happens when the extreme cold conditions are there? One is it will have an health effect, that is loss of life. It can also have health issues. Then this cold conditions, it creates fog like conditions, winter fogs, winter fogs. And sometimes these winter fogs, when they mix with the smoke, they create the smog in the urban areas, which again have health impact. Now these fogs, when they develop, so they will always disrupt the transportation because visibility is reduced. Whenever fogs are there, the visibility is reduced, decreases, and hence these trucks, railways, flights are cancelled during that. And this smog or the cold fog, they affect the infrastructures like marbles, buildings, or metal statues, etc. They affect the infrastructure. Then they are responsible for disease in the crops. disease in the agricultural crops. Then they are also associated with whenever when we have large amount of decrease in the temperature, we start using electricity, fuel, coal. And when we use that, it will these are the one which are responsible for emission of greenhouse gases. Emission of greenhouse gases. And this ultimately will lead to global warming phenomenon. Right. So these are the impact of cold waves, loss of life, health issues, transportation issues, visibility is reduced, infrastructure issues, and large amount of greenhouse gases are released whenever such types of events are there. Is that clear? Now the disease in the plants are in the wheat. We find the disease which are referred as black rust in the wheat, and in the mustard, white rust and aphid. In potato, late blight, late blight. This is mustard, white rust, and in tomato we have late blight. So these are the disease which are associated with the cold. Disease which are associated with the cold. Sometimes they may ask in prelims, match the following: the disease and the crops. The disease and the crops. While writing means you don't have to remember this, but in prelims, if it is your SNT, you have to remember these parts. In geography or in ecology, you have to remember they are something which are responsible for, because during that the pests and the disease will be very very strongly affecting the socio-economic conditions of farming communities. So this will directly affect the economic condition. Is that clear? Now the same colors, color codes are used. Color codes are used: yellow, orange, red alert. Same, whatever you have read in the heat waves, the same you will find in the cold waves also. Heat waves, same we can find in the cold waves also. Yellow alert, orange alert, etc. Right. So these are the facts. Please read them carefully. Now we move on to forest fires. So I hope it is clear for heat waves, cold waves, and India is something which is experiencing that. Now we move on to understand forest fire. Now this forest fire is an important component. It is important component of grasslands and forest ecosystem. Right, important component of grasslands and forest ecosystem. If only if it is periodic and controlled. It is important component of grassland and forest ecosystem if it is periodic and controlled. So this helps in many ways. Helps in many ways. It helps in germination of new seeds. It helps in controlling alien species. It removes the dead stock, the dead branches, which helps for the movement of animals, etc., movement of forest officials, etc. So all these are advantages which are associated with that. Uh, Heat waves are considered as natural disasters. Now here, remember that heat waves are something which are not considered as the notified natural disasters in India. They are not. I'll explain why they are not considered as the notified disasters. So maybe day after tomorrow, that is on the Friday, on the Wednesday, the last class, I'll explain that. In India, there is something called as notified disasters. So in the notified disasters, 13 disasters are classified as the national notified natural disasters. Right. So cold waves is a natural disaster. notified natural disaster, but not the heat waves, right? So I'll explain why and how it is being done. So at this stage, remember that heat waves are not classified as notified natural disasters, right? Forest fire. So focus on this, so that whatever question you asked, Sony, is correct one. But I'll explain that when I take what are the criteria to define the notified disasters. Is that clear? So at this stage, just remember that heat waves and its conditions. Why not and why? That is explained on basis of certain parameters. I'll explain that. Right. So it is based on NDMA Act and other perspectives. Perfect. Okay, so forest fires important components of grasslands and forest ecosystem if it is a periodic and controlled one, because this will help in controlling of the alien species or bioinvasion. It helps in germination of the seeds. Then it will also help in clearing dead stock, etc. So and it also adds nutrients faster whenever the plants are burnt. So it will add nutrients faster. It will add nutrients faster to sun. These all are referred as if it is a periodic and controlled one. And if the forest fire, if it is uncontrolled, if it is uncontrolled, then that will create a disaster. So remember that if it is uncontrolled, then that is referred as the disaster. Disaster. Now, the reason for forest fire is it can be natural, like volcanic activities, lightning, etc., or it can be man-made factor. Man-made factor. Now, man-made factors can be maybe because of error, or maybe because of deliberate. Deliberate means with purpose, or sometimes some accidental parts are there. So it can be natural or it can be man-made. Now, these forest fires, they're always named after the places where the forest fire starts. They are always named after the area where the forest fire starts, so that it is easy to locate the place, easy to identify or locate the place in the disaster management. It is easy to identify. So hence all the forest fires are always named after the places where it originates. Where it originates. Important one. And these forest fires, they have increased here because of the global warming, heat waves, deforestation, etc. So they have increased because of heat waves. Uttarakhand. So Uttarakhand forest fires placed on that. West Bengal forest fires, right? Then Bandarghatta forest fires, Camp David forest fires. So all these are named after the places where they originate. Named after where they originate. Then they have increased. They have increased because of the global warming, heat waves, etc. And if there are dry winds, and if the vegetation is dry, if vegetation is dry, then these forest fire will spread very fast. They will spread very fast. Right. So this is some basic idea about the forest fires. Uncontrolled forest fires will always create a disaster. Right. Now, the reasons for that, before that, all the forest fires can be classified into three categories: ground fire, ground fire, surface fire, and ground. So, ground fire means sometimes beneath the ground where peats are deposited. Surface means above that. So, surface and ground, they can be controlled. They can be controlled. But the ground fire is very difficult to control. Very difficult to control. The ground fire is very difficult to control. So we can control these, but not the ground fire, where it spreads faster along with the fire, along with the winds, like Amazon forest fire, Australian bush fire, where it catches the ground. Amazon, it spreads very fast. And last year, we had a large amount of forest fire in the Western Ghats. Even today, if you see Uttarakhand, we find the forest fires have increased. Right. So we always find the incidence of forest fires associated with these parameters. Right. Now the reasons for the forest fires, they can be natural, like lightning, frictions of the stones, or volcanic. Anthropogenic factors, that is man-made factors. Anthropogenic means man-made factors. So in that it can be deliberate, purposeful, like shifting cultivation, right? Or accidental, maybe collection of a timber, burning of from farm residues, etc. Right. So deliberate is seen. Sometimes a person smoking a cigarette, when it throws that, that is called as deliberate. Smoking a cigarette, then throwing that, that is called as deliberate one. Right. So sometimes we throw them accidentally also. So such types of incidents, sometimes it is deliberate and sometimes it is cigarette, but the idea is both are man-made factors, right? So man-made factors and natural factors, so which are responsible for the forest fires, right? So heat waves isn't a natural cause. So heat is because of human impact, and the temperature is increased due to global warming. So please remember, global warming increases the average temperature, right? So that is not a natural cause. It is because of the human involved activities, right? Now, the impacts of the forest fires are, it will add pollutions because the smoke, the dust which is added by that. Generally, we refer that as brown carbon, and this deteriorates the air quality index. So this makes the air more polluted because of large amount of the nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, all these which are added, the dust, smoke which is added. So the pollution increases in that air. Then livelihood loss for the forest dwellers, because large amount of the timbers, they get fire. Minor products are destroyed. Minor forest products are destroyed. So hence their livelihood loss is there. It means that their earnings are reduced. Earnings are affected, right? So loss of biodiversity. So whenever forest fires are there, many animals, they either burn or they get injury. Many plants, also the same thing. So plants, animals will burn there. So loss of biodiversity, loss of life and property to the tribal peoples, and the people who are staying in the adjoining areas. We refer them as fringe communities. fringe communities, right? Then, whenever forest fires are there, if this area is having forest fires, then in that case, many wild animals like elephants, cheetah, leopards, they leave the forest area and enter into into human habitation, where it leads to man-animal conflict. It will leads to man-animal conflict, and this leads to death or losses. Not only of wild animals, even the human beings also loses that part. Then global warming. We all know that forests are referred as the major carbon sink. They are referred as major carbon sink because they are something which are responsible for large amount of carbon sequestration, like Amazon forest fires, or something which we refer them as Western Ghats, where we find large amount of the carbon dioxide is absorbed them in the form of photosynthesis. When the forest fire is there, the stored carbon dioxide is re-emitted. So when fires are there, the stored carbon dioxide is re-released. It is re-released. It means already stored is re-released. And if you see the data, according to the present data, the data which was given in 2023, 15 to 20% of carbon dioxide is released by forest burnings. 15 to 20% of re-released carbon dioxide is in the form of this, and this is creating a global warming. A positive loop is created. So this forest fire creates a positive loop. Positive loop. Forest fires, re-releasing of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, which increases the average temperature. So it creates a positive loop. Forest fire and the global warming. Then it accelerates other disasters. Sometimes when the forest fires are there, over a period of a time, it can create drought, right? And other types of disasters. So these are the impacts of the forest fires. Impact of forest fires. Is that clear? Now next is forest fire in India. If you see the India's data, there has been 46% increase in the forest fires from 2003 to 17. 90% of the forest fires are man-made. It is either deliberate or with accident. More than 50% of geographical area is affected by forest. So in India, if you take the area, the total area of India is 329 million hectares. And out of that, 50% or more is affected by the forest fire. It means vulnerable. Then northeastern and central India are the worst affected. Northeastern side and the central India are worst affected. Fire season of India is February to May. This is pre-monsoon. Pre-monsoon. And monsoon is determining factor. Monsoon is primary a determinant fire season. Delay in monsoon. Delay in monsoon will make the conditions very worst. That's what Uttarakhand forest fires. If you are reading current affairs, Uttarakhand forest fire is due to delay in the monsoon. West Bengal, delay in the monsoon, because if there is a delay in the monsoon, the vegetation will always be in the dry. If it is early, then it is advantage, because early monsoons will make the vegetation wet, which is very difficult to catch the forest fires. Is that clear? And the index which is used to give the early warning system is Keith Barham Drought Index. So this is used to understand the increase in the temperature. So it is used to measure the dryness, and this will help us in giving early warning systems. Early warning system in the context of the forest fires. So remember these facts with reference to forest fires in India. Apart from that, factual data and their perspectives. Apart from that, if you see the Indian perspective, the region wise, if you take this area, which is referred as northeastern part of India, the northeastern part of India is vulnerable for forest fire because of shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation. Second, deforestation. Third, delay in monsoon. Delay in monsoon. Fourth, drought. Drought. Now, if you see the regions here, the central area, and central area and all, if you see, it is drought prone area, dry region, dry region, and some areas in Chhattisgarh and all. So we find shifting cultivation is there, right? And apart from that, heat waves. In Telangana, we have heat waves. Then if you take the look in Uttarakhand and all, so here it is mainly because of delay in the monsoon, droughts, heat waves, deforestation, right? So all these are responsible for the forest fires in the context of India, right? Yes, that in the Chhattisgarh, when we say deforestation, coal mining, right? So you can give that part also, coal mining or deforestation here, or coal mining in that region. So these are the reasons for the forest fires in the context of India. Reasons for forest fires in the context of India, right? So always questions can be asked on these. So if you draw the map and if you show this, it is having a weightage. So always practice the map. Maps are very, very important. If you practice the map, then it will fetch you some extra marks in the context of your examination. Is that clear? Now, in the context of India, this will be the last discussion, and tomorrow we'll take up forest management in India. So, in context of India, we find satellites are used, and these satellites, they are MODIS, that is Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectrometer, which was launched in 2022, and then we have something called as SNPP and VIIRS, that is Visible Infrared Imaging Radiometer. SNPP, Suomi National Polar Orbiting Partnership. These are used in defining or having early warning system. They are used in providing early warning systems. And they have created a system which is referred as FAST, that is Forest Alert System. Forest Alert System. So if you see the data, at present we are using the third version of that. We are using the third version, FAST 3, that is Forest Alert System 3. And this third version always provides real-time monitoring. Real-time monitoring. So it means that if any incidences are there, immediately it gives into part. So this is how the early warning systems are there in the context of India by using the satellites, MODIS and SNPP VIIRS. Is that clear? And this is Aqua and Terra, US satellites, US satellites, and this is also the same, right? So you don't have to make technical points. Just remember that fast forest alert system, which is used in providing early warning system, and now we are using third version of that, right? So I'll conclude the class here today. Tomorrow we'll continue from where we have left. Is it clear? So make proper revision. Don't get much stress. I'm trying to explain the things in the simple or simplified area. Wherever current affairs are there, I'm explaining them in detail so that you can link that with your knowledge. Even if you are having less geography information, you can link that with your perspectives also. So revise, don't get much stressed. Read the content, read the PPTs, read whatever the contents are given along with the PPTs and the explanations. And tomorrow we'll meet up at the same time. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you. Take care.